Let's get started by talking about why we're all here today, honoring and discussing Hidden Compass's legacy issue, which is out now and celebrates 6 years. Sabine and Savannah, let's talk about how we got here. Tell us a little bit about how Hidden Compass came to be. What's the origin story that got us to this moment right now?
We're excited to be here and to talk about the origin story because Sabine and I both started as freelance journalists. And we were roaming the world and having our own adventures. Sabine was escaping political unrest in the Andes. I was sailing across the Drake Passage to explore Antarctica. And we met in a bookstore, of all places. But we hit it off and we had these conversations about a publication that we wished existed, stories that we wanted to write, stories that we wanted to read, and how there was just fewer and fewer places that were willing to publish those stories that were more nuanced and nerdy and cross-disciplinary and about places that couldn't sell tourism dollars and ads and things like that. And so Hidden Compass was born initially out of both frustration and hope for our profession and industry.
I'll add to that we had a lot of different frustrations, in our industry. A lot of people were sharing this narrative that publishing is dying and that readers are not interested in long, complicated, nuanced content, that people's attention spans are shorter now. And Savannah and I found ourselves in a position where we were really pigeonholing a lot of the stories that we were pitching publications, and wanted those stories to exist, but also stories from all of these other incredible storytellers and photographers and journalists out there that deserve to be in the world.
And so we started Hidden Compass after a year of, we became friends. We started a writers group, spent about a year beating our heads against the wall. And after about a year of that, realized, well, if, the place didn't exist, then maybe we should create it. And that was the start. And that was 2017. We published our first issue in August of 2017.
And we are now in 2023, and we are talking about a legacy issue. Where did this idea come from? Why is it so important in this moment right now?
Well, I think Savannah and I are learning more and more to pause and appreciate just how far that we have come. It has been 6 years since we founded Hidden Compass, and we're coming up on 100,000 readers, which is a huge milestone and one that we wanted to pause and celebrate, not just amongst ourselves, but with our readers and with the world at large. So we took the opportunity to sit down and look over all of the stories we've published the last 6 years and pick 10. It was very hard to do. And we picked 10 stories from around the globe, from across the departments in our publication from over the years, that really celebrate the breadth of the type of stories that we love to publish at Hidden Compass and the voices behind them.
Well, that gets me right into my next question. With so many of these powerful and compelling stories to choose from, how did you narrow it down to 10? What was the criteria? How did you figure that out?
The short version of that answer is it was hard. We looked back at all of the stories we published, which was also just a really fun exercise for us to go back and just see how many stories we had published, how they were still relevant, how they were these sort of evergreen stories that took on new resonance over the years. But we wanted to select stories that showed all of the different kinds of nerdiness and characters that we embrace as a publication. So, everything from a story by Kim Stone, who owns a horse ranch out in Maine and drew on her own experiences cowboying in the Great Basin region to paint a picture of a disappearing culture. We had Colin DeLita, who took us on the trail of an enigmatic shark while excavating this concept of who is a modern explorer and what that means. Alexandria Scott, who shares an important story about history, culture, and the spirituals that led her enslaved ancestors toward freedom. And of course, we do all of that, and then we turn to literature and identity with Lance's story. And Lance is here with us today, which we're really excited about. And it's a story that is personal, but also follows the stories of Jack Kerouac and Lance's own journey. And so we wanted to pick stories that encompassed a little bit of everything that we do.
Well, that gets me right to Lance. I read Out of Desolation, Lance. It was wonderful. It first appeared in Hidden Compass back in 2020. And I was really taken aback by how beautifully it connected with the sphere of Jack Kerouac. And Lance, how did you connect with Sabine and Savannah and Hidden Compass to bring this all together?
I found a listing. They were looking for writers on a Facebook post in a freelance, group that I follow. And their mission seemed intriguing to me, and I didn't quite have the full story together. I just had an idea. So I pitched them this idea. I said, hey, I've been reading a bunch of Jack Kerouac, and there's this angle that I haven't heard many people talk about. And so that started a conversation with Sabine and Savani and their editor. And we got to talk a lot about, where this means, how this means something to the culture right now. And for me, it meant a lot personally. And I put a lot of my personal story in that piece.
That's fantastic. As a member of the LGBTQ community, a veteran, a firefighter, an outdoorsman, a literary figure, you really bring a unique perspective to readers. What inspires you? How do you tap into writing material?
I feel like as a writer, we continually ask ourselves, and lately that has been the thing that inspires me, is finding the story that nobody's telling. Like, a lot of the history of the LGBT queer community is hidden. It is obscured, even erased. And so I've been looking for those role models and those stories that reflect who I am in the culture. And so that's where the Jack Kerouac piece came from. They released an unpublished scroll of his work on the road. And in that, there's actually quite a bit of queer material. And that started this whole thing because I was already such a fan of Jack Kerouac. And then I find out that, okay, wow, he was actually a part of the queer community. And I started asking the question, why or how? How is he similar to me? So that inspired me to go down this road, and continues to inspire me now, looking for more of those stories that people aren't telling.
Keep digging. That's what I have to say. The Out of Desolation was fantastic. You should be very proud.
Thank you very much.
I know, Sabine and Savani, this might be tough to answer. Which of the 10 stories in the legacy issue is your favorite, and why? You could have more than one favorite, by the way.
Oh, that's a hard question, Andrea. It was hard enough to narrow down 10 stories for the legacy issue from all the pieces that we've published over the years. But I also, as a publisher and as an editor, I have the incredible privilege of working with a lot of these writers behind the scenes. And so the stories that jump to mind are the ones where we went on a journey in the editorial room with them. And so, for instance, Edme Van Rijn, who is a conflict photojournalist who works in the Middle East, we worked on a story with her that's called Into the Whirlwind. And Edme is not used to being the subject matter of her own work as a conflict photojournalist, and she is a big character in that piece. And we got to work with her to bring readers into very extreme environments, both the hot and sandy and chaotic areas where she was photographing in the Middle East, but also to cold and snowy and Arctic landscapes in Norway where she's dog sledding. And it was such a creative juxtaposition of experiences that dropped all of us into the experiences that Edme has. And so being able to work with these writers to showcase their personal experiences as a lens on a bigger conversation, which is what we're always looking to contribute to at Hidden Compass, has been really rewarding. So that piece jumps out at me. And then also I'm thinking of Maud Roll's piece, which is Into the Shimmering Void. And she really championed a historical blind explorer, but also herself as a modern blind explorer. And she brought us into the past and around the world, but also through the experience of sight loss, which for a lot of us is a foreign experience. And this is this sort of what we call at Hidden Compass cinematic journalism, where we publish these stories that are evocative, that bring you into these experiences and these places, introduce you to these characters, but also make you think about a larger conversation, such as who are our role models, who gets to be an explorer, what is the humanity behind conflict photojournalism, all of these things, and to get you thinking about that through the lens of personal experience.
Savani, do you have any favorites among the 10 that are in this legacy issue?
Choosing a favorite is hard. It's kind of like Sabine. I love all of these stories for different reasons. And, Lance's story is one of my favorites. It's one that I send to people all the time because it gets us into really important global conversations through very personal stories. And that's something I love that we do. And we have these writers who get to follow their curiosity. And that's something that we encourage. And those are our favorite stories. When a writer comes in and is, I'm really curious about this. I'm nerdy about this. This is something that I've been studying and reading about and learning about. And I have this story. And it's a story that no one's told yet, because it's a story only they can tell a lot of times. And Lance's is one of those. And so I love that story for that reason. Kim Stone's Great Basin Buckaroos is special to me as well, in large part because I had the incredible opportunity to travel with her. The story came out of getting to see her in action in the Great Basin region and talk to her about this experience that she'd been having for more than a decade, and getting a glimpse into a world that I would not have had access to but for her. And so in talking to her over the course of a week while we were out there, it's like, this is a story that you need to share with a broader audience. And it was not an experience that she'd had. She's a photographer. She doesn't really write for a lot of publications. She was willing to tell this story and give us access to a world that most of us would never even know existed. And one of the things that I love about that story is how it recirculates through that community that feels like they are seen in this story. And that's something that I'm really proud of, that we've been able to do with many stories that we've published. And so those are a couple of my favorites from this legacy issue.
These stories are so rich and interdisciplinary and creative. They challenge our readers in a way that a lot of publications just aren't doing these days. And it makes me excited about the future of publishing, because when Savani and I started Hidden Compass, we were really inspired by what's happened in the food industry. That, for most of human history, food has by nature been local. It's been seasonal. It's been handmade. It's been organic. And then, in the last century or so, we've seen this mass commercialization of food, which has had a lot of positive outcomes and is really exciting, but also has this other element to it, which is that there's a lot of processed food that we're consuming. And we've seen how culturally we're pushing back in a lot of ways against the health impacts of that. And I think we're at a similar moment with media, where we're thinking about the impact of what we put in our minds, as well as the impact of what we put into our bodies. And so to be able to publish stories like these that are complicated and rich and that champion nuance and challenge our readers, I think invites an opportunity for people to really run in this direction and to see more of that.
Let's talk about the junk food movement in media. And there's been a lot of it, and there's a lot of noise to get through. How, as publishers, do you work to fight against the clickbait and work to fight against the 24-hour news cycle and the attention span of a gnat?
Largely as a publication, we've just simply rejected it. We only publish 20 stories a year, and that allows us to spend the time with our writers, getting to know them and make sure that what we're publishing is of the highest quality, that it's a story that our writers are also going to be proud of for years to come. And some of my favorite moments are when writers come back, a couple years later and say, this is one of my favorite stories that I've ever published. And that, as a publisher, is incredibly rewarding. And then we had to, though, obviously think about the business model and how that has changed. And we looked at why publications that we love were failing, why they were struggling, or why they were doing okay, but had done it by trading quality for quantity and clickbait. And we wanted to come up with a new path forward, one that didn't have to be unique to us, and that encouraged other publications down the road to think about different ways to be creative. And so for us, that meant looking at that traditional subscription model that publications just superimposed on the internet age and realizing that it doesn't work the way that it used to. And what we did also see, though, with the rise of the internet is this focus on community and people wanting to directly support the people and organizations that they care about. And so we want to leverage that sense of community, that sense of participation, and the best parts of the internet. And we've done that by really humanizing our journalists so that people know that they're not just reading a story, that there is a person behind that story, that that person has whatever personal connection they have, that they have put in the work, and getting to know them. So we launch patronage campaigns with every story we publish. And that is a way, we pay all of our writers, but it's a way for readers to directly support the work of our writers and ourselves. We split the proceeds of those campaigns 50-50. So it's a second paycheck for the writers of the stories. And it's a chance for us to really reflect what we see as a partnership. And we look at publishing not just as a partnership between us and our contributors and our writers, but also of the audience. And so we wanted to create a model that really reflected that and honored that partnership and made the audience integral members of what we do.
Talk about humanizing journalists for a moment, because it's a tough moment to be a journalist in particularly the United States of America right now. And there's polarization and demonization and fake news and misinformation, and it goes on and on and on. How do you humanize journalists? Is there a craft to doing this? What are some things that can be done to change that narrative?
Well, one of the things is to introduce people to the faces and the voices of the journalists themselves, and that's why we have Lance with us here today. That's why we record conversations with every single journalist that we publish and put in our website, so that our readers can meet in a certain way the individuals behind the byline, which is very rare. As a journalist at the beginning of my career many years ago, I was inspired by all of these writers and photographers and journalists who were reporting from these new frontiers in a lot of ways, but I couldn't actually see beyond maybe the names that were appearing in the publications. And so to be able to introduce our audience to the people that we work with is so wonderful. And it's been great for us to get to know these individuals better too.
It's a big ask of journalists too, to step out from behind the byline. And so Lance, I actually want to ask you, what is that like for you as a writer to have to talk to your readers directly about your work when you work with Hidden Compass?
I think it's thrilling. I love the relationship I've built with you guys, the founders of Hidden Compass, as well as the editors that I've got to work with. And then being able to take that relationship and expand and actually connect with readers and share life together. I think that's a community that writers don't get often. We sit in our rooms at our desks and we're typing away or we're handwriting our stuff, and it's very solitary. So to be able to step into a community and feel supported and be in dialogue with not only your work, but other people's, and then how people read it, I think it is absolutely beautiful and a completely unique thing. As a freelancer, I don't often get to know my editors. It's a very one-time thing that I do each time. And the relationships that I've built just with your publication and then with the readers is unrivaled anywhere else. And I think it's a wonderful exploration of community.
Lance, what's that moment like? Speaking as a journalist myself, there's always the ask, trying to get the subject you're hoping to write about to buy into your idea for a story, to collaborate with you. What's that moment like to look internally and say, I have to get buy-in with the community, get buy-in with my editors. I have to expose myself in a way that I ask my subjects to?
I think it's all about trust. You have to trust when you put your ideas out there that someone hears you and thinks that what you have to say is important. And then also, that's the editor side. And then the reader side, you have to put your story, expose yourself and your ideas, and hope to be accepted. And that's sort of mirrored in, my life as a gay man. That's constantly, every time I come out, I do that. And writing is the same way. You put together this piece that you pour your heart into, and you just hope that you find readers and you hope you find editors that find value in your work. And so to get to see people's faces and talk to editors and talk on the phone, build these relationships, and then reach out to readers directly is a phenomenal experience.
Well, it was so rewarding for us to be able to work with you, Lance, and to check in years after publishing your story to continue talking about it. This idea of humanizing storytellers, it goes beyond just one sliver of identity. And one of the things that I really appreciate about our work with you is that we got to bring in all these aspects of who you are, and not just have you be only a member of the queer community, or only a firefighter, or only a literature nerd, or only an outdoorsman, to be a complex human being who's exploring all of these aspects of who he is. I think that is taking humanizing storytellers to a different level. And I appreciate that you were willing to go there with us.
With that in mind, I will say that so often as a writer, you're trying to fit into a very specific box to fill a need for a publication. And that's a hard thing to do. And you have to figure out how to line everything up. And so to be able to say that I am a multidimensional human and I want to talk about all the different ways that these things intersect, that is a phenomenal thing. And I thank you guys for being open to that journey together, especially for my piece, which was started as an idea. It wasn't like a full-fledged already written piece, So that was a really fun thing to go through with you guys. And thank you for being guides and support during that process. I mean, look what came out. It was wonderful. So thank you.
We're so grateful to our writers who are willing to put themselves out there and do this thing that they are not used to doing, that we ask them to do, which is talk to their readers. But it comes down to, we started this conversation, this question in particular, about talking about the current state of media and mistrust with the media. And at the end of the day, we're betting on the fact that people trust people. And if they can see the people behind the stories and connect with them and understand that there is a human behind the byline, right? That there is a real person with real complexities and real life experiences, that they can learn to trust media in a way that we haven't been in the last few years.
Well, I think that brings me to my next question. Let's talk about journalism and the state of writing today. It's in a moment right now, and not a particularly good one. Layoffs, shrinking newsroom, mistrust, AI entering the chat right now with ChatGPT and others. And there's a rapidly changing face of writing. How do outlets like Hidden Compass, and specifically Hidden Compass, address these changes, and what can writers be doing?
There are a lot of things that we are doing at Hidden Compass that can also be used by other publications. I think there are multiple levels of responsibility to addressing this issue and this current crisis in the industry. As a publisher, we are trying to be creative and think beyond the business model, the one business model that is used by most publications. As Sivani mentioned earlier, we do the opposite of what most people tell us to do. Most of the wisdom is publish as much content as possible, as quickly as possible, and have it be easy for people to understand and digest and read. And that way people will consume it quickly and they will click through to the advertisers who are funding that particular business model. And we had to really imagine the opposite extreme of that, of what would it be like if we actually published less and focused on quality instead of quantity. And I think that this also leads into the other tier of responsibility, because then that has us turn to our readers and say, is this the kind of content that you want? Are these the kind of stories that you want? And invite readers to step up and participate, to get to know these storytellers, to support them through our patronage models, but also to become part of a community that has these conversations around what kind of expeditions and exploration we want to fund and publish and showcase. And that is something that we're introducing through our Modern Exploration Society, which is called the Alliance. People have the opportunity to become allies, to pay into a membership model where they can watch storytellers pitch ideas for expeditions, which have been vetted by a panel of experts. And then the allies have the opportunity to vote on which expeditions we fund and to follow along behind the scenes and get to know these individuals more and better. And so the more that people participate in that type of creative storytelling and media, the more opportunities there will be for other publishers to follow suit.
It is a partnership. And with every partnership, each member of that partnership has their own set of responsibilities. And so there are the responsibilities of the publisher. Writers also have to exercise the power that they do have, which is hard to say in a time when writers are underpaid. But we do see, we have a great example of writers right now who are fighting and advocating for their work with the strike that's currently happening in Hollywood. And AI is a part of that. I mean, that is something that they are negotiating around as well. And I do think that as more publications turn to AI, the publications that don't, there will be people, and I'd be one of them, who would be looking for those publications that are still human-centric. And that's going to become more valuable to certain people. And much like Hidden Compass started out of us believing we couldn't be the only ones who wanted this kind of content, these kinds of stories, I have to believe that I'm not the only one, that Sabine's not the only one that is going to seek out stories that we know are written by humans as opposed to by machines. And then there's also the audience, which has a level of responsibility in this, right? To demand quality content, to consume junk food media in moderation. I mean, it's out there. It's a big tent. There's no reason that it doesn't have to be out there. Sometimes it is enjoyable, much like junk food, but to consume it in moderation and to reward the publications and the writers that respect their intelligence. And that's where the audience comes in.
I mean, let's be frank, AI could not produce the story out of Desolation that Lance wrote. That does not happen. You need the human touch. And how do you build more of those human elements into writing, into the world of writing in the future now?
I think a lot of it is us turning to writers themselves for their creativity. I mean, Lance came to us with an idea and we got to collaborate on that. And that sort of attitude of going into a conversation with editors and saying, here's my idea, here's where I want to take this, what fits for your publication, how can we make this the best possible story? And out of that conversation, all of these elements will blossom into being that bring in different layers, that bring in different elements of the humanity of the person writing it, or the humanity of the people who are showcased in the story. I mean, not every piece that we publish at Hidden Compass is centered around the writer. I think about Paul Fisher's story, Gazawood Dreams, where Paul did travel to Gaza to report the story, but it really is centered on these two Palestinian twins who are trying to create films in a place where all of the cinemas have been torn down. And that is a place where the writer can be our lens into getting to see and experience to a certain degree this story of other characters from around the world. We want to contribute to the global conversation, but we also want it to truly be a global conversation, to showcase voices from all over the world and from different experiences, and that sort of trust from the writers, but also their sources, to open up and reveal parts of themselves and their experience for us to share with the world is really integral to that.
When you and Savani set out to grow Hidden Compass, how did giving voices to underrepresented people play a part in your decision making?
Initially, it was about giving voice to a diversity of stories. And from that, it was obvious, it was an obvious step from there that the diversity of voices would also be necessary. And so, like Sabine said, we want stories that contribute to global conversations, but it's just as important to us that those global conversations include global voices. So when we're in editorial meetings, we make sure that we're not just assigning the right stories, but also that these are the right people to tell the stories and the right people to be featured in those stories. And Alexandria Scott's piece, Wade in the Water, is a great example of this, because this is a story told about her ancestors and her experiences. And it uncovers this incredible history. And she's the right person to be telling that story because it's directly connected to her. And it's not always about the stories where the writer has a personal connection, like Sabine said. It's also the stories where the writer has the ability to bring the right characters into the story, to introduce us to the right people, the people whose voices we really need to hear. And so it's a natural step for us when we're looking for the diversity of stories to look for the voices that really should be telling those stories.
I'm sure there are people watching right now who are itching to pitch you. And what are you looking for?
we focus on what we can contribute to the global conversation. And that's the first question that we ask is, as a publication, we are asking our readers to stop what they're doing with their lives and to pay attention to this. So what is this adding that is new or important? And to that end, showcases perhaps a voice or an experience that isn't getting a lot of attention. One of the freedoms of having this type of business model is that we don't need to focus just on places where advertisers will pay to run their ads on those stories. And so we can really be global. Like Savani said, we think about whether or not the person who's pitching the story is the right person to tell that story. And also, to ask if there's an arc to this story. And what I mean by that is, will readers leave the piece in a different place than when they started? Because otherwise it's not really a story, it's just a topic.
Right. And then there's always the question of can this story marry that evocative literary style with the well-researched, solid journalism? Because that is the type of storytelling that we do.
Are there any subject trends that you, Sabine and Savani, are excited about right now that you're looking forward to putting into future issues?
We don't, it's fun because we don't really operate that way. And so the short answer is no, because if a writer is pitching a story about a, quote unquote hot topic, for them to make it into Hidden Compass, they have to come at it sideways and upside down. We want stories that are not what our readers are going to expect. And I think there's great freedom in that for writers. I know on the occasions where I've written for us, and Sabine also, we don't write for Hidden Compass ourselves that often, but on occasion we have, and there is great freedom and a sense of possibility in knowing that we're free to tell the story that needs to be told. And that's what we want from the writers who pitch us, that they're excited to tell the story that needs to be told, whether there is a popular topic or location or what have you, because that's not the story we want. We don't want the story that can be published in a dozen other publications. We want the story that's a Hidden Compass story.
Look what we're doing with Lance's story. We published that piece in 2020 and 3 years ago. Obviously, a lot has happened in that time, and we're able to come back and revisit that piece and republish that piece now because we didn't tie it to a specific time. It is a piece that shifts as the years go by, which is beautiful because then these aren't the kind of stories that you read once and then discard. They're the kind of stories that can stay with you, that you can come back to and you can see how you are changing, the world is changing, and this particular topic is changing.
Right. The stories aren't static in that way, which I love about the stories we publish. Their resonance changes over the years, even for the writers who write them.
Lance, since we're talking a little bit about your work right now, what are you currently working on?
It's been fun in these last 3 years to keep freelancing. Currently, I have a piece coming out any day in Travel and Leisure, another one in Backpacker, who I've been writing for regularly. And then I have another piece about the queer relationship with nature in UC Berkeley's Parks Stewardship Forum. That should be out in a couple days. But what I'm most excited about that I'm working on is I've been following along with the Pathfinder Prize that just had their first expedition, and it's been absolutely inspiring. And it has been so cool to watch, and it's been bringing up so many ideas in my head. So I talked to my friend, writer and mountain climber, Charlotte Austin, and we're coming up with a proposal that we're titling Beyond the False Summit. We've been doing a bunch of research and finding out about queer climbers in history. About 100 years ago, there was actually quite a few that people don't really know about. We want to go on an expedition to the Alps in Europe and follow along and find these stories and tell them like nobody else has before. So we're super excited about putting together that proposal. I'm very grateful for Savani and Sabine's Pathfinder Prize. It's a really cool, inspiring thing that they've created for future explorers. So very excited to be a part of that.
On that note, Savani, Sabine, let's talk about this Pathfinder Prize. What is it? How does it work? What are you looking for?
It is a $15,000 grant to fund a global expedition of the modern age. So we are a storytelling company. We are looking for storytelling. But beyond that, we leave it to the folks who are proposing expeditions to think creatively about what that storytelling can encompass. And the way that the process works, we're currently accepting proposals. There is a proposal guide on our website, hiddencompass.net. And we accept proposals from all over the world. We have an advisory panel that will narrow down the finalists. And then those finalists will pitch their projects live, virtually, but live, to our alliance members. So these are members of that modern exploration society that we've been talking about, and they will decide who we fund ultimately.
It's really set up to celebrate this modern era of exploration. You know, historically, exploration has been more about conquest, and now it's more about understanding. And we are looking for proposals that explore frontiers that are not just physical, but also intellectual and ethical. And we're looking for creativity. We want to be surprised.
And the Pathfinder team that won the inaugural prize is composed of three storytellers, three visual storytellers. Two of them are Nigerian-born journalists, and one is a Swedish filmmaker. And the three of them traveled to Greenland recently. And their expedition was to follow in the footsteps of a Togo-born explorer, Tete Michel Pomasi, who was the first African that we know of to travel in Greenland. And he wrote a book about it. And it was a book that inspired some of their careers as well. And so they took this journey to Greenland to talk about who gets to tell the story of a place, to follow in his footsteps, knowing the influence that he has had on their own careers, and to really examine these cultural questions. And so, like Sabine said, you know, what type of expedition we're looking for is really open. So this was a cultural expedition. Our other finalist was more of a scientific expedition. And so it's very broad, and we are excited to see everyone's proposals, including Lance's, because that sounds like potentially an incredible expedition.
What can readers expect in upcoming issues that you are excited about, that you, when you wake up in the morning, you're like, I wonder what's happening with this case?
So we publish quarterly, and after the legacy issue has its 3 months of glory, we go back to our typical publishing schedule. And in August, we are going to have 5 new stories by 5 different writers, with everything from a story by a neuroscientist experiencing phone withdrawal to the personal stories of enslaved and indentured people in Salem, Massachusetts. We're really excited about that story, all the stories in the August issue. And speaking of the Pathfinder Prize, in November, we're going to have a Pathfinder themed issue of Hidden Compass. Allies, members of Hidden Compass, the Alliance, have gotten to see a lot of behind the scenes content from the expedition, but the November issue will be a chance for us to share the stories behind that expedition with the public at large. And so the 3 storytellers from Team Tete, the current Pathfinder expedition, are going to take over the magazine, and they're going to share incredible photography and stories from their time in Greenland.
Well, Lance, Sabine, Savannah, I am grateful for all of your time today. And for those of you tuning in, we're thrilled you could be here and join us. Go to the URL below for more information, and we'll all talk very soon. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Andria.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.